We the People lecture series of Exeter is delighted that you're here. As our speaker Liz just said, we love talking about heroin. We don't really, but it needs to be talked about, and that's why we're having this event tonight. The We the People organization is a joint program run by the Congregational, Episcopal, and Unitarian churches here in town, along with the Water Street Bookstore and Phillips Exeter Academy, and we thank the Academy for hosting us here this evening. I wish that I could say that we had planned tonight's event, A Path to Opioids Recovery, One Family's Experience, as a sister event to President Trump's appearance in Manchester earlier today. We would really have been on the ball if we had been able to organize that on purpose. But as it turns out, we just have the luxury of that, and some really interesting things happen there today. I'm sure, I've only heard part of the news, but somebody here tonight has told me that our very own Mosier family from here in Exeter was interviewed on CNN, and Trump introduced them, I think. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
So kudos to them. They have appeared before. 2 years ago, we did a few opioid events, and the Mosier family participated in some of the in a panel discussion here, and they've gone on to do great things. Tonight's speaker is here because she and I met on an airplane. We were on a flight from Boston to Philadelphia, and I like to chat to my seatmates usually, and have a reputation for doing that, and this one turned out to be really a good conversation. Turns out Liz started her working career at the high school I graduated from, knew all the teachers I'd gone to school under, and also we had some common friends. So the conversation kind of went from there. And then it turned serious because she shared some stories, a story about her family and what they had been through. And it turns out that she had a lot to say. Liz is articulate, she has a really good heart, and quite a story as you're about to hear. And the best part, from my perspective, is that she's sharing it with other people, because that's what she really needed at the time when her family was in the big struggle. She's since written a book with her son about their experience and is looking for an agent and a publisher, if anybody has any suggestions. And she's also gone back to school. She's gotten both a certificate in drug and alcohol counseling, and she's about to begin a master's in social work. There's one other good aspect to our timing tonight, March 19th, that I also wasn't aware of when we set this up, and that is that tomorrow is the first day of spring, which is always a good sign of hope. And that's what we're here to hear about tonight. Please join me in welcoming Liz Tank.
I'm Liz Pankel. I want to say thank you to the We the People Committee for hosting this event. Thank you to Lisa Butler for welcoming me and making my visit possible. I'm going to talk to you about what I've learned about the current drug epidemic as the parent of an addict in recovery and as an activist and an advocate in my home state of Pennsylvania. Before I share my family's history, it's really important for me to acknowledge that my family had every advantage in dealing with this problem. As a white middle-class family in an affluent suburb, we had the support of law enforcement and access to excellent health care that are not available to all members of our society. Our son was at the frontier of a shift in the perception that recognizes substance use disorders not as criminal acts, but as a mental health issue. This attitude distinguishes this epidemic from past epidemics, such as the crack epidemic where Black people were remanded to prison instead of being offered support and rehabilitation. Drug addiction only became a mental health issue, crisis when it affected white suburban families. My husband and I cannot take all of the credit for our son's success, nor can our son take all of the credit for his own success. For reasons that are not fair or just, we were given support that is not extended to all families. As we address the addiction issue for families and individuals, we must also address the issue that the opioid epidemic underlines the fact that there is no equal access to justice and treatment for all of our communities. Tonight I will share with you some of the things that I learned on my journey, some things that I observed, some things that I did, and some things that I wish I had known. Thank you for your interest in this issue. So I'm Liz Tanker, and I call myself the Hester Prynne of heroin. And as you can see, I've removed Hester's A and I've replaced it with an H. This is because as soon as I found out that our son was a drug addict, I immediately started talking with everyone that I could think of. In fact, the very first person that I told was the police. Our son had a very, very good DARE officer, and he was my first contact. And I called Officer Jim because I knew that he would be compassionate toward us, that he would understand, and that he would give me excellent guidance. And I do realize that this is a luxury that not all families can do. But for us, it was an important step. So I started talking about heroin immediately to the police. The second time I had to be open about our son's heroin abuse was when our son, my second son, who was never an addict, was in the 7th grade. He was in the 7th grade when our older son went to rehab. And our son's school, which was West Town School in Pennsylvania, I don't know if any of you know it, but it's a very nice boarding school. My son was a day student there. And his teacher invited everyone to participate in their literary magazine by submitting a story about something that was important to them. So my son wrote a beautiful story, which I had not read, and he submitted it to his teacher. And the head of school immediately called me and said, "Liz, we have a terrible problem. Ethan's story is so disturbing that we cannot publish it in our school's literary magazine." And I could see what she meant, because the other stories were about the day we got our kitten and a visit from Grandma. And I'm only going to read you the first paragraph of our son's story, because it was published. I told her that I insisted it had to be published, that these were his words and his feelings, and that I wasn't going to edit his feelings. He had to have the opportunity to have a voice. So this is what he wrote. There I was around the same time, the title is, Who Are You? There I was around the same time of night listening to the same terrible yelling emitting from my parents and the horrible beast downstairs that I could barely recognize as my brother. I was burying my head deep into the pillow to block out the terrible sound. It was as if the yells that were coming from the kitchen were actually coming up from the ground. I cringed as I heard my dad yell in a booming voice in the kitchen, Look what you've done to our family. Look at what you were still doing." My dad yelled with uncontrollable anger and sadness at Eric. As this was happening, I buried my head even deeper within my pillow. I felt my dog's cold nose nuzzle me in the side, as was his custom when he became afraid, which was happening more and more often. And that's what our life was like. So, my big son, Eric Pankel, who's 32, has been in recovery for 11 years. He was a high school dropout at 16, and he ended up, at the end of the day, getting his master's at the University of Pennsylvania, and he's currently a family therapist in our community, and he's much sought after. He helps a lot of people. So, after 11 years, why am I still talking about this? Because it's important for people to hear the whole story about addiction and all the options that can happen. And I think that in a situation where you're only hearing about the deaths or kids who end up living under a bridge and shooting up, it's very hopeless. And people need to hear stories like our family. People need to see me and understand that this can happen to all families. And I hope that I'm part of the effort to destigmatize this affliction and let people know that it can happen to all sorts of families, including families like mine and like yours. So this is my favorite quote from Mark Twain. Good judgment comes from experience. Experience comes from bad judgment. This is my story. Results may vary. And it's important to remember these are only my opinions, which are changing and evolving constantly. The things that I held to be true even a year ago have shifted as I become more educated. I just finished my certificate as a drug and alcohol counselor at Villanova University, and as Lisa mentioned, I'm about to begin my master's program at Bryn Mawr College in social work. doing what our family did could result in death. And that's important to know. While our situations are similar, our experiences of them are so different. It's never too late to change your situation. Sometimes adversity can be a true gift. So this is about our family. We did not present as a family that felt we were at risk for abuse. I've been married for 36 years. Neither of us are drinkers. We had no history of substance abuse in our family. We lived in the same house for 32 years. And I thought we were pretty safe. And what I realized through this is that no one is safe. Oh, and we're Quaker. You don't hear a lot about Quaker junkies. It's like, oh yeah, he was a Quaker, I wasn't surprised. An important part of our story is my neighborhood. So as I said, we lived in the same neighborhood for 32 years. And we had a lot of kids in our neighborhood. We had 7 boys who were all born within 9 months of each other. And those boys played together since they were, could walk. And when they grew into their teen years, they were extremely close. And on our street, all 7 boys became heroin addicts. And this is in a middle-class suburb of Philadelphia. And all of them, except my son, did jail time. So I'm going to walk you through my street. Oops. I'm not good with this technology. Oh, there it is. So the kid there, that kid, has been clean for about a year. He's 31. But a year is a good start. He served 2 years in prison for DUIs. That's my house, and my son, as you know, is doing well. Down there, that kid is in prison for 20 years. Right across the street from him, that kid was in prison for 2 years. He's been clean for 7 years. He's doing great. Next to him, that kid is still in active substance use. And then at the end of our street, there were 2 brothers in the same house, Irish twins, born 9 months apart. One died of a heroin overdose. One committed a crime with a gun and was in prison for 7 years. He's out and he's doing great. Sometimes prison can be a good thing, and it was for this kid. He'll talk about that prison was the beginning of his sobriety. And I say, bad ideas are contagious. I don't know why good ideas aren't contagious, but bad ideas are very contagious. So this is our story, and that's a picture of my son right now. So our story starts with trauma, and I think that most drug abuse does start with trauma. And our son's trauma was that when he was 9, I went into a coma for 2 weeks. I had significant brain damage. So when I emerged from the hospital, I also was in conjunction with having just had a baby. So when I came home from the hospital, I had lost most of my speech. I had a significant cognitive impairment. I had retrograde amnesia that went back 2.5 years. So I didn't know that I had even been pregnant, and I didn't know about the baby that I had delivered. So our house, to say the least, was chaotic and confusing, and our poor 9-year-old son, who had had so much attention from us, really got lost in the shuffle. And we've identified this as his primary trauma. He started having problems in school, and we really didn't know what to do about it. A lot of times, kids who were traumatized, who have PTSD, present as people who have ADHD, or just behavior problems. His problems followed him all the way through school. He failed the 5th grade, the 6th grade, the 8th grade, the 9th grade. And in the 10th grade, I insisted that he quit school and get a GED. He had a lot of friends who were making bad choices. In fact, in his cohort, 12 of them have died of drug overdoses. So I forced him to drop out, and I sent him to community college, which seemed so counterintuitive, but it was the best thing that I could do, because he was able to continue his education. Even though he was stoned most of the time, he did get a few good grades and some credits. This is where it gets dangerous. We had to kick him out of our home. And I don't recommend this in this fentanyl, in this time where fentanyl is so available. He was at the very beginning of it. The summer that we kicked him out, 52 heroin addicts in Philadelphia died of fentanyl overdose. I think that it's kind of, that's one that you have to really think about carefully. Kick them out when you've exhausted all of the other possibilities. We sent him to rehab. One of the things I learned was we really should have sent him to rehab way earlier, but keep in mind, 11 years ago, things were very different. There were not a lot of rehabs available, and there was very little information available in general. Like, we had dial-up internet, so to do any internet search, it was that real, waiting for answers. So there was not a lot of information available. At the time, there was part of the mythology was that a kid has to want to go to rehab, and now we know that that's not true. They're too sick to make that decision. So, by hook or by crook, if you can get them into rehab, that's a good start. So his rehab consisted of 10 days of detox, followed by 60 days in an intensive rehab in Montana, which included an outdoor experience. I cannot speak highly enough about this experience. After that, he flew directly to a halfway house where he lived for 9 months. And then he flew directly to a sober college, which he attended for 2.5 years until graduation. Oh, and then we forgave him. And then we had to think about, what does success look like? And if you have loved ones who are substance users, that's something that the family has to decide together. What does success look like? And for our family, we wanted him to have the opportunity to continue his education and to be in a helping profession. And so for us, that's what it looked like. But we know kids who are electricians, plumbers, do auto body work. Whatever they do, we find that the kids in recovery do amazingly well. If I had to boil my whole presentation and my whole experience down to just 2 slides, it would be the next 2 slides. So this is our son. On August 13th, 2006, he had been through his 10-day detox. And this was the day he arrived at Wilderness Treatment Center in Montana. He was 6'3", he weighed 125 pounds. He was so malnourished that he couldn't produce testosterone. He was 20 years old and he had no beard. He looked like a boy. This is just 60 days later. He gained 55 pounds in 60 days, and I thought I was the only one who could do that. Here he has stubble. When I saw this picture, I could not stop crying. I could not believe this transformation. My sister's crying right now. But it was amazing. But this was only the very, very beginning of our journey. So what I learned is addiction thrives in the dark. So I shined a giant light on it. Treatment and 12-step programs are amazing. Oh, recovery is not always a straight line. I'm sorry I have to keep turning around, but I forget what I wrote down on this. Don't think it has to get really bad before you send the kid to treatment. That was a mistake that we made. We really should have sent him much earlier, but we didn't know what we were dealing with. But as I said, treatment can work even if the kid doesn't want to go. Oh, this is what we learned the hard way. Keep your alcohol and prescriptions in a locked space. So I have kidney disease, and I'm like a Pez dispenser of kidney stones. So I have, it's just nonstop. I always say, like, oh, I just need some earrings, you know, and a necklace, and cufflinks for you. But, so I had a lot of OxyContin in the house, tons of it, because I would, go to the hospital with the kidney stone, they'd send me home with 40 pills of OxyContin. And no one ever said to me, this is like having a gun in your home. In fact, one of the other kids on our street, the kid at the very top of the slide, his dad was a professional tennis player, and he had a lot of OxyContin in the house too. So, without my knowledge, even though I kept my drugs in a shoebox in my closet, which I thought was really safe because I have like 40 pairs of shoes. But kids have time, so who knew that whenever I leave the house, he'd be like, I wonder what my mom's up to. And he told me the first time that he found my prescriptions, it was a bottle of Vicodin. He knew about Vicodin because of a song by Eminem. He said that when he saw that, he couldn't believe it. He couldn't believe his good fortune. And that's when he started taking drugs. He started taking my own drugs. So I suggest to every family, you must have a safe. Even put NyQuil in it. Put everything in it. If you, sometimes just making it hard for them to get drugs is enough time for their good sense to kick in and not use them. So anything you can do to delay that is good. Create a substance-free environment for your loved one. That was so helpful for our family. Because of my kidney disease, I only drink water. And my husband, out of respect and kindness to me, is not a drinker. So we didn't have any alcohol in our house, and we still don't. And that's very helpful to him. There are people who say, it's his problem. I shouldn't have to suffer for it. And I'd say, we already suffered a lot for this. This is easy. Consequence and punishment are not the same thing. So it's very important if you have a kid who's in active substance use or an adult, let them feel the consequences. But don't be mean about it. And sometimes in our journey, I was genuinely mean. But, it's a time of war. It's over, but it's good if you can avoid that, it would be good. The 4 C's. One of the great things about Al-Anon and AA is that there are all of these great slogans, and I love this one, which is, you can't cure it, you can't control it, you didn't cause it, but you can certainly contribute to it. So as a parent dealing with these issues, it's important to understand your role in enabling these bad behaviors. It's very helpful if everyone's on the same page. So parents, don't pit yourselves against each other. It's really helpful if everybody, in our house, what we did with my husband and I did was whoever spoke first, that was the thing we went with. So it was always like Jeopardy, like he'd come in and do something really awful, hit the button. And whoever spoke first, we went with whatever that was. Even if later we disagreed in private about it, we always presented a unified front. It took more than 30 days to develop the problem. It's going to take more than 30 days to get over it. This is something I always forgot. Before you suggest rehab, make sure that you have a plan. Like, the tendency, particularly with kids, is like, that's it, I'm tired of this, you're going to rehab. Know exactly where the kid's going to go, how you're going to pay for it, how much it's going to cost, and how long he's going to be there. Always have a plan. Never use rehab as a punishment. Have all your ducks in a row and present rehab in a moment of calmness and clarity, rather than in a moment of fury and passion, even though it feels better to do it like that. What we learned is even though we were really good, we got better. better. Like, we were a really strong and happy family, but through this process and through him going to AA and us going to support groups, we really came to understand each other and ourselves in a way that wouldn't have been possible without this. Support groups are a community of people working together at the same time to be better. And there's no way you can do this alone. So throughout this process, this was a quote that really sustained me, which is, I'm dropping all of my stuff. I don't have this memorized, so I'm going to let you read it for a minute. All right, has everyone read it? Oh, thank you. So that's beautiful. And it was written in the 1700s. So that shows me people have always had problems. This is what we look like now. So my older son, as I said, he's a family therapist. My younger son is at Penn right now studying to be a family therapist, and he's going into practice with my son in September. And they actually want to, I don't know if I'm going to practice with them, but they want to do a consolidated effort with me to help families, the three of us, which is amazing. And my husband pays for everything. So this slide has a link, which is an amazing link. It's a book that was produced by our local Karen parents group called Standing in the Storm. And everyone in the group contributed a chapter, and I contributed a chapter. What's really funny is I don't remember what chapter is mine. So when I read this book, I'm like, oh, that's definitely my chapter. No, that's my chapter. I still don't know which it is because they published all the chapters anonymously. But what it showed me was our experience as parents going through this is so universal. Our stories are so identical that it's uncanny, and we can learn from this. So if you want to take a picture of this or ask me about it later, I'll give you the link. It's free. It's a great book. It's about this thick. And then another piece of our success story was that he did go to a recovery school. He went to Augsburg College in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And it's a regular 4-year liberal arts college that has this sober component. It was the first sober program in the country. And they have a sober living dorm with 24/7 access to counselors. They have a great peer mentorship program. A lot of consequences. It's wonderful. And it really sealed the deal for him. That's what made him able to, be successful now, is having that experience. And when he was at Augsburg, one of the things that made me laugh, so he went right there from the halfway house, and he went in May. I said, you have to take one summer course. It's all you have to do. So he signed up for some easy course. It might have been an art course. And it was so stressful. He didn't think he could do it. He used to call me every night and say, I hate it here. I can't do this. Why? This is ridiculous, blah, blah, blah. The next term, I made him sign up for 2 courses. He was like, are you out of your mind? I barely got through 1 course. How am I going to get through 2 intensive summer courses? Do you have any idea how much work that is? I was like, yeah, I think I do. So he started freshman year with a full course load. By the time he was a senior, his week looked like this. He did a double major, and he did honors programs in 2 different majors. He took 6 courses his last year. He worked 25 hours a week for public safety. He was on the Step Up board of directors. What else did he do? It was insane. Anyway, he was busy all the time. And I laughed because he went from not being able to think that he could complete 1 course to having this massive course load and workload and being happy about it. So, what we always have to keep in mind is it's a journey. Like, don't panic. Just hold the course steady. And that's it. About opioid abuse. Our oldest son was in the first wave. So we didn't really know how to handle his relationship with his younger brother. They are 9 years apart. The younger brother, the pregnancy with the younger brother was my reason for going into a coma. So, there was, I'm sure, some residual resentment about that. And we just decided to go with our gut, and our gut told us that if our younger kid said, I really hate him, and I wish that he was dead, that we would honor that. And we'd say, we don't blame you. So we never tried to control their relationship, and we never made him edit his feelings. And that's why having him publish this really brutal account of our family life in a 7th grade literary magazine was, here we go again, it was so important. And that's what we did. So with the younger son, he never took drugs. He never was in any trouble. He's really been the perfect child. He and his brother are best friends. They are, in fact, the picture that where I said that you redefine what success looks like, I don't know if you noticed, but they're wearing identical outfits. That was from this Christmas. So Eric came over to our house the night before Christmas, on Christmas Eve, when we exchanged gifts. And he gave his brother this package, which had clothes in it. The shirt, the pants, socks, and shoes. And he said to Ethan, can you do me a favor? I'd love to see you wear this outfit tomorrow for Grandma's Christmas dinner. So when we went to pick Eric up, he had on the same outfit. So, because we've all had so much therapy, it's only appropriate actually that now we're going to all be professional therapists. They have a very open and loving relationship, and it's easy. It's effortless. When we sent our son out of the house, how we kept track of him and how we got him into rehab after kicking him out. Our son, being homeless on the main line is probably a lot like being homeless in Exeter. You just end up on someone else's nicer couch. There were a lot of families that were willing to take him in. Even though I begged them not to, I would go to the houses and say, you're slowing me down. You gotta kick him out too. He has to feel pain. He has to feel what it's like to be cold and hungry and afraid. I didn't want him to be like homeless in Philadelphia, but I just wanted him, like one of the places that he crashed was this giant mansion, and it had a swimming pool that had a bridge over it. And they had a security system with a gate, so you pulled into their beautiful driveway, put the code in, the gate opens up. And I remember thinking, damn it, I wish I could be living here. Like, I'll be a junkie and live here. Like, where was the justice in this? In fact, I was at this house because we did have dinner with him every Sunday night, and after this dinner that we had, I drove him to I said, where do you want to go? And he took me to this house. And then as I was pulling away, he came running back. And I said, Mom, stop. I need my laundry. It's in the back of your car. And I said, why? And he said, well, their maid does my laundry for me. I was just disgusted. I was like, that's great. So in terms of keeping track of him, it's funny. When he was out of the house, I didn't feel like I had to keep track of him. What I realized was that when he was out of my home, he was doing exactly the same thing he was doing when he was in my home. He was taking drugs. He was hanging out with, troubled kids. He was lying. When I kicked him out, I just thought, I can't control his behavior when he's here. I certainly can't control his behavior out there. So I absolved myself of trying in any way to control what he did. We did take his cell phone away from him, so he didn't even have a cell phone when we kicked him out. We kicked him out cold. But as I said, we had dinner with him every Sunday night. So he knew that we loved him. We kept presenting the option of rehab, but not forcing it. And so finally he was arrested in Philadelphia for heroin possession. And he spent 2 nights in lockup in an infamous jail in Philadelphia called the Roundhouse, which now is actually luxury condominiums. So he when he was arrested, he was in with, it was really tough, like being in lockup in Philadelphia, just, pimps and drug dealers. And he was the only white kid in lockup that night. And all his other roommates, because they're in one central cell that has a bench that goes around the side. So he was so low on the totem pole, he didn't even get to sit on the bench. He had to sit on the floor. And when he slept, he took the liners out of his sneakers and he used them as a pillow. And the other kids and young men, and maybe even some old men, that he was incarcerated with said, "What are you doing here?" And what did you do? Are you a college student? And at that time he was in community college. And he was like, yeah. And they said, "Do you think your mom would send me to college? Are you out of your mind?" And that really woke him up because it showed him, the people that he was with had no options. And here he was giving all that up. So when he was released from prison, his jailer said to him, "I know you're going to go out and cop some dope, and we're going to arrest you again. And that's what your life is like." So he did go out and he bought some heroin, and he snorted it or shot it up. And then he called us immediately, and we picked him up. And that was the beginning of his recovery. Understand, it is not my problem. His life is his. I can't control anything. I can only control myself and my reaction to it. It's completely not my problem. And people always ask me, "Do you ever worry about him relapsing?" And I want to say, do you ever worry that I think you're a jerk for asking me that? Not that you are. But people will say that all the time. You wouldn't say to someone who has cancer, "Do you worry about getting cancer again?" It's just not for me to worry about. And after 11 years, are we out of the woods? I don't know. We could be, but we might not be. So what keeps me going is that I think about where we've been, I think about what he knows, I think about what I know, and I think that if he did relapse, it would be a lost weekend as opposed to a lost year or a lost life. He has all these tools in his toolbox. But it's funny because people ask me that all the time, and they would ask me that in his really early stages of recovery, "You've spent all this money," and we even had to mortgage our house to pay for rehab. I think about the day that I decided to do that. It was like stepping off of a cliff. And I just had this confidence in him, in all of the things that we had put in him while we were raising him, that it was an investment that would be well spent. And I did it without worrying. Once I committed, I just had to go forward. So, yeah, it's a good question, and people do ask that, but no, it's not for me. And you do learn that in the recovery groups, in the parent support groups. Yes?
First of all, I want to thank you for your presentation. I wouldn't change a syllable.
Thank you so much.
I'm also a person in long-term recovery, and you said so much that resonated with me. I too come from a typical addict profile. I won't get into my story here, that's for another night, but I've lived much of what your son lived through as an adult, as a father. And two things that really struck out at me. You talked about the fact that when he went from one modality of care to another, he was whisked away onto a plane and went to another place. When he finished that, he was on a plane. And I think that's really an important point, because the point where people like me or people who are suffering from addiction are most vulnerable, it's when there's time and space between treatment modalities. So for instance, if he's coming out of inpatient treatment, it's really important that he doesn't wait a week to get into intensive outpatient. And it's really important that he doesn't wait a week to get into a sober living house, because he will buy a phone, he will hook up with his old friends, and so that, from one place to another, I was literally escorted from one place to another, and that really was a key element in my own recovery. And then the second thing you mentioned was the self-care. You started to touch upon it there. So there's my question. What did you and your husband do when your son was in the throes of addiction, as well as in the early stages of his treatment and recovery? What did you do as individuals and as a couple and as a family? I heard you mention Al-Anon. I'm interested in hearing perhaps how you made it.
Yeah, that is so key to having a successful outcome, is taking care of yourself. So when our son went to rehab, my husband lost his job 10 days later, which is so typical. I mean, I used to think I was the only person that happened to. I know like 10 women that's happened to, and then my husband got cancer. So we really got hammered with these bad things. My feeling was, and I've always felt this way, is that life is meant to be lived and enjoyed, and to surround yourself with friends and people who love you and to do service. So even though it was really hard, and there were drug dealers that my son owed money to, so we were getting a lot of threatening phone calls. And at that time, the police told me, at night, don't stand in front of any windows. It was really tense. We still had dinner parties. And I'd say to all my friends, you might get shot, but come for dinner anyway. And people came. It was amazing that we still had our group of friends who loved us and took care of us, and we let them. And we still had parties, and we still went to parties. And even though I had no income, and I was spending at this point $1,000 a day for treatment, and $200 a month on health insurance, I decided to spend $50 a week to rent a horse, which is crazy, but it was the only thing that kept me going. I was like, I need that pony. I don't even care that we are drowning. I need that pony. So yes, it's very important. I want a pony. In fact, there's a funny story that happened when my son was using drugs in a really tough neighborhood. And and this is where I'm going to swear. I had told Lisa that I wouldn't say any bad words, but now I'm going to, in the context of the story, say a bad word. So we always had horses. I've ridden my whole life. We moved to our house so that I could have horses, but by the time all this was happening, all my horses had died of old age. And my son was using drugs in the city, and the kids were talking about their horrible lives and their parents, and someone's mother had shot their pit bull, and this kid didn't have a father and was beaten all the time. It was just terrible stories. And they got to my son, and he said, my mother shot my pony. And they said, what? And I had shot the pony because it was 36 years old. It had cancer. And in Chester County, that's just what you do. It's very fast. They go down before you even hear the click. My friend did it. I just held the pony, and gave him the pony's schedule and a picture of the pony. So he said, my mother shot my pony. And everyone looked at him and said, you had a motherfucking pony? And he said, yeah. And they said, where'd you keep that motherfucking pony? And he said, in my yard. And they were like, dude, you had a motherfucking pony that you kept in your motherfucking yard? What the fuck are you doing here? And that was such an epiphany for him. So, yes, I rented a motherfucking pony. Word up. In Iowa, 3 in Texas, which is so surprising because it's so progressive and you don't think of Texas as like, we're going to deal with this head on. Rutgers, Brown University, and this school called Oxford College, which was in Minnesota. And we just felt that we knew he wouldn't go to Texas, but we felt that he might go to Minnesota, and he did. In fact, it's on that slide, so that's the Directory of Recovery Schools. Yes, there are something crazy like 200 programs between high school and college, and it's a great system. Communities of color, poor communities, don't have access to the same things that we had access to, and that is a social justice issue. And I think it starts by having conversations with all of us, being aware of the barriers to treatment that some families face, where they don't have a choice. So, when you talk to your legislators about the opioid epidemic, make sure that you include communities of color, because it's important that everyone has access to the same health, safety, and life that middle class and wealthy people do. Yeah. None of his stays were covered by insurance. It was $1,000 a day. So I decided, because I have a lot of really good connections, and I had a friend who had a brother-in-law who was a principal in a Madison Avenue law firm. So I called this guy and asked him if he'd take me on as a pro bono case, and I sued our insurance company. Now, I had studied our contract very thoroughly. They really only owed me, I think it was $8,600 in change. And they wouldn't pay a penny of it. So I sued them with his help. I told him I'd give him a third of what I got. And I think the payout was over $24,000. Insurance companies wanted to exhaust you. They wanted you not to fight back. And I found that pursuing them aggressively was an awesome place to put my never-ending well of anger and despair. So I just focused it on that, and it was worth it. And it set up, I hope it set some sort of a precedent for families, everyone that I've spoken to, that you can be aggressive. In fact, it was funny because I had to go through 3 sets of appeals. The final one was with the ombudsman for the state of actually New York, because my husband worked in New York, and that was where our insurance was based. And the ombudsman sided with me and said that I should be, that they should pay me the $8,600. And you know that it's only a suggestion? It wasn't mandatory. It wasn't binding. So when the ombudsman's office wrote to my insurance company, they're like, we don't care. And that's when I got an attorney. I hope that, as you go forward, you'll share the good news that heroin addiction is not a death sentence. We know so many young people, in my son's friend group, that are business owners, they're fathers and mothers, they have kids. One of his friends is getting a PhD at Penn now, another kid just got a PhD in math in Florida. We know kids who are successful and happy. We know families that are unified, and that has to be part of this conversation. It's tempting to focus on the many, many deaths that have occurred from this, but we have to focus on the many lives that have been salvaged and saved, and remain positive about this epidemic and even the opportunities that it provides for us to get to know each other better and to be part of a bigger conversation about justice and what's fair. Thank you so much.